We now return to the Transformers.
The movie is where we jump ahead to the year 2005. The Decepticons now rule Cybertron, and the Autobots operate on Cybertron's moons and Autobot City on Earth. We're introduced to the Autobot Matrix of Leadership and, of course, Unicron, the biggest threat the Cybertronian race has ever faced, along with several new characters. Megatron is turned into Galvatron, and we meet the second villain faction of the following season, the Quintessons. Some of the most quoted lines from Transformers comes from the movie.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Such heroic nonsense.
A ginormous, weird-looking planet.
Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior.
Oh, shit, what are we gonna do now?
Guilty or innocent?
Innocent.
Excuse me!
It's a shame this movie was panned by critics at the time, a lot of them calling it a Star Wars ripoff. Something I don't really agree with. I mean, I suppose Unicron is comparable to the Death Star, Megatron and Hot Rod use lightsabers at different points in the movie, and RC's head resembles Princess Leia's hair, but these are all surface-level details. In fact, I've already done a review of something that has a far similar plot structure to this film than Star Wars, the original My Little Pony film. Hell, that movie was animated by ACOM. Of course, it's also infamous for all the casual deaths of recurring characters. On the one hand, it makes sense. They are fighting a war and having no casualties seems implausible. But on the other hand, it happens so suddenly you would assume these weren't recurring characters or something when watching. Now sure, most of them weren't going to be any longer, as the purpose of the movie was to show off the new characters and sell their toys, but narratively most of these deaths aren't satisfying. To say nothing of how Optimus Prime's death ended up making children cry. So imagine what would have happened had the showrunners gone with their earlier plans for the film.
So you had this one scene where the Autobots basically had to run through a gauntlet of Decepticons, which just basically wiped out the entire 84 product line in one massive charge of the Light Brigade. So whoever wasn't discontinued stumbled to the end, and yeah, that of course never made it into the movie. But if we think kids are locking themselves into the room over Optimus Prime, basically in that scene they would have seen their entire toy, collection wiped out.
And as if to make things more troubling, Optimus's successor, Rodimus Prime, is a very controversial character, largely because of the role he played in Optimus's death. Trust me, Rodimus Prime is getting a segment all to himself because there's a lot to say about this character. For now, let's just move on to Season 3. Picking up a year after the events of the movie, Season 3 begins with the impressive 5-part episode, 5 Faces of Darkness. A lot happens, so for the sake of keeping this video from being as bloated as, well, my very first Headmasters review, I'll just say the 5-part sets up the Decepticons are now on the burnt world of Char. Galvatron has been driven insane and will attack his own troops if he feels like it. The Autobots are in control of Cybertron, for that matter we're going to alien worlds a lot more often, and we're introduced to the first city bots. Oh wait, we call them Titans now? Well, whatever you call them, Metroplex and Trypticon exist. The latter destroying the Autobot headquarters and Teletran 1. Mostly to cover up the fact Casey Kasem had quit the show. Being of Libyan descent, Kasem was, shall we say, slightly offended by the recurring Middle Eastern country introduced in the season known as Karbamia. Yeah. That would be like if Transformers Prime introduced a terrorist nation called Plane Crashistan. And of course the revelation that the Quintessons from the movie are the creators of the Cybertronian race, at least in the original cartoon continuity. A lot of hardcore fans prefer the Primus origin, but if you ask me, there's something satisfying about the Autobots and Decepticons' own creators also being their enemies. Episodes where they're the villains tend to focus less on the Quints getting more power or conquest, and more manipulating events, such as war profiteering between two planets, or more prominently, tricking the Decepticons into doing their dirty work. What I'm saying is the Quintessons make for more interesting villains than Primus does as the big good of the series.
And the longer I keep showing footage from Season 3, the more you're gonna notice ACOM are back with a vengeance. They animated more than just 3 episodes this time. They animated almost half the series at 14 episodes. And they... Is that supposed to be Cup or Springer? Does Magnus even have a face here? This is the title sequence, people!
They've really doubled down on their errors here in Season 3. Characters will often have early models instead of their finalized designs. Details are missing. Characters who died in the movie are seen running around Autobot City or among the Decepticons' ranks. Characters who are part of combiner teams will be seen alongside the fully formed Jesselt. And of course, logical holes, though that one was on the writers like it was in Season 2. To ACOM's credit, the scripts they were given were much better than the ones like the Autobot Run or the Core. Most ACOM episodes aren't worth powering through, but I feel Five Faces of Darkness, and perhaps more importantly, Dark Awakening, an episode where the Quintessons animated Optimus's dead body to lure the Autobots into a trap, forcing confrontation between him and Rodimus, are not only watchable, but some of the better episodes of the show overall. Yeah, are you beginning to see why I like the Quintessons as villains? They make ACOM episodes easier to sit through. And now that I've mentioned Dark Awakening, it's time for me to bring up Rodimus Prime. Simply put, Rodimus is not the grand hero a child could look up to in the way Optimus was. Rather, he's someone with responsibility thrust upon him and has to learn how to be a leader. Now, the knee-jerk reaction to say is he's not worthy, but isn't that the point? That he grows into it? I'd say that happens in Season 3. Dark Awakening and Burden Hardest to Bear are episodes that involve Rodimus coming to terms with Optimus's death and the responsibility of taking over as leader, with the episode Ultimate Weapon helping him overcome his insecurity about not being able to live up to Optimus. It helps that this episode is complemented by a similar situation involving one of the Protectobots, First Aid, as well as the only episode where Metroplex and Trypticon have a fight that isn't made by ACOM. These two deserve so much better animated fights. Sorry, ACOM episodes are distracting. We're talking about Rodimus. Admittedly, a lot of fans looked at Rodimus as uncaring, especially after the events of Fight or Flee, where he intentionally blows up an Autobot colony world to stop the Decepticons from getting it. An unorthodox approach for any Autobot, at least in the original series, with the episode ending on this note.
It's as beautiful in death as it was in life.
Well, no need to get all mushy. Cybertron's a better place anyway. Not so perfect.
Putting all this together, I think I understand the core reason why Rodimus didn't connect with audiences in 1986. He's one of the few anti-heroes in a show placed in a role held by a character known for their nobility. Except I feel like many fans who make this argument are putting Optimus on a pedestal. Many call Rodimus incompetent, but Optimus ended up making a lot of bonehead decisions over the course of the first two seasons as well. Just look at what happens in A Prime Problem and Auto Berserk for good examples. Detractors will say Rodimus is whiny, but Dick Gator's performance frankly sounds more like he's annoyed than whiny, which is part of his character, so frankly it sounds like they're missing the point.
Now, I was going to mention TF Wiki and some of its snark towards Hot Rod, but I actually found a better example during editing. The Transformers Deviation comic, a what-if scenario saying what would have happened if Optimus didn't die in the movie. Turns out the answer to that question is Ultra Magnus turns into a mouthpiece for the hatred pointed towards the character.
Maybe it's just viewers idolizing the first two seasons to the detriment of the third. That's why I feel the Season 3 finale, The Return of Optimus Prime, undermines one of the rare examples of a character arc in the original series. Not helped is the series' continuity errors it creates as it tries to create a way of saving Optimus's body before its supposed destruction in Dark Awakening, but it doesn't quite match up with how that episode ended. Also, the threat of the hate plague, the MacGuffin plot of the episode that turns all Transformers into raving lunatics. Well, we're told and shown they attack everything and everyone on sight, but also seem lucid enough to be able to gang up on people who aren't infected for some reason. The show's fridge logic is at play here, leaving me at mixed feelings in regards to Season 3 as a whole.
Which I get the feeling will lead to similarly mixed feelings in regards to this segment for you, the viewers. Which is why I'm going to mention something a bit more lighthearted. See, Rodimus is considered one of the only characters to actually get a character arc in this series, but I would argue there's at least one other. And it's a bit surprising since Simon Furman, Transformers comic book writer and big fan of this character, wasn't a writer on this show.
Me, Grimlock, want to munch metal?
That's right, it's Dinobot leader Grimlock. Whether it was intentional or not, there is a noticeable change in his character. In Season 1, he's established as proud, strong, and arrogant enough to think he's a better leader than Optimus because he's physically more powerful. It takes very little for Megatron to convince him, Slag, and Sludge to turn their weapons on Optimus. Though after Optimus saves Grimlock from the episode's MacGuffin, he's more willing to follow Optimus's orders. At first. As Season 2 continues, the Dinobots have to keep bailing the Autobots out of trouble, with Grimlock verbally expressing his irritation at this. Until it all comes to a head in the Desertion of the Dinobots two-parter, where they, well, desert. Until Shockwave captures them, forcing them to work together with Spike and Carly to escape. From the movie onward, Grimlock is more willing to work with others, often being shown without the other Dinobots in Season 3. Now, the movie and Season 3 shifted the Dinobots away from the foreground and more into comic relief. Here's a fandom perception that I only partially agree with. I won't deny Grimlock's dialogue is delivered in a more childish way, but he still feels in character for the most part, like wanting to hear Cubs tell war stories, and then threatening violence if he doesn't get it. Finally, there's his last appearance. The beautifully animated episode Call of the Primitives has him save the universe from an energy-sucking monster. Like this.
Grimlock solve problem.
Of course, the reverse switch. Why didn't I think of that?
You're not smart primitive like me.
Now, this episode does contain one contentious bit. This monkey alien thing is Unicron's creator in the cartoon continuity. A bit disappointing, as this Primacron character really does not have the same potential that Quintessons have, so he's been quietly forgotten whenever Unicron shows up in later media. Still, as far as the finale to Grimlock's character arc, not bad, G1. You usually have characters establish a personality in one episode and then just kind of leave them there, so one of the few times where you gave a character an arc, not bad at all. Finally, there's Season 4, or rather the 3-part episode, The Rebirth. It was going to be a 5-part opening to a full season, but the powers that be at Hasbro pulled the plug on that. Damn, they were so close to making it to 100 episodes. They just had 2 more. No, seriously, if they had 2 more, this probably wouldn't feel as rushed as it does. The show has to introduce a lot of new characters at this point. The Headmasters, their Target Masters, and their Nebulon partners. Which means a lot of the new characters are just kinda there. Characterization is very light here. Brainstorm comes up with the idea for the Headmasters, but for the most part, the only new character who has any kind of real characterization is the pacifist Cerebros, which I find funny because the Rebirth is one of the rare times where he is a character and not a drone or some extension of Fortress Maximus. But the Rebirth does end the Transformers on a high note, as Cybertron is restored to full power using really weird logic of channeling excess energy from the sun into Vector Sigma using rockets. Because logic is for losers. It's a very quickly put together ending, but hey, this is a show made in the 80s. We should be grateful that there is a finale in the first place. I ended up enjoying watching the original series again. In fact, I think I appreciate it more than when I first watched it in the early 2000s. I can see just how far Transformers has come. It's good stuff, but it's bare bones compared to a lot of later shows and comics. So if you intend to check this out, then allow me to give you a few recommendations for which episodes are worth watching. Autobot Spike. One of the rare times the show acknowledges being around the Autobots and Decepticons during their war is dangerous and someone could get hurt, as what happens to Spike here, requiring his mind be put in a Frankenstein-styled robot. Traitor. The best Insecticon episode and a good spotlight for Mirage. Cliffjumper's McCarthy-style mistrust of Mirage comes out of nowhere, but at least it serves the episode instead of detracting. The Golden Lagoon, a spotlight for Beachcomber, giving a precedent for future gold recolors, and an environmental message that doesn't beat you over the head with heavy-handed dialogue. Triple Takeover. 2 words. Zone Defense. Starscream's Brigade and Revenge of Bruticus. The Combaticons introduction and one of Starscream's more successful attempts to overthrow Megatron. 5 Faces of Darkness. Establishes the Quintessons as a threat and re-establishes Galvatron's more unstable personality. There's also a subplot with Blitzwing that disappointingly doesn't get followed up on. It was going to continue in Starscream's Ghost, but Octane was the newer toy, so he had to take part in the story. Dark Awakening is appropriately named, with the zombie Optimus sacrificing himself to save all the Autobots from a trap he was leading them into. It's arguably a more noble death than his death in the film, though it is animated by ACOM, so it's nowhere near as well animated. His return in the finale kind of cheapens the impact here, but in a vacuum it's a very different experience than most kind of episodes. Web World, a funny Galvatron episode where his insanity has become such a problem, Cyclonus has him committed to a psych ward planet. a planet Galvatron ends up driving crazy. You heard me right, he drove the planet itself insane. Though I wouldn't recommend the ACOM Season 2 episodes or the Megatron's Master Plan 2-parter. It's not worth it unless you like slamming your head into the wall because of stupid actions taken by the characters. I would recommend the Season 3 episode Only Human, but only for the appearance of Cobra Commander in this series. The episode itself is barely thought out.
Whether or not I've come full circle is hard to say, but regardless, thank you to all of you who have stuck around over the years, and here's hoping that this turns out great in the future as well, just like how Transformers went from a very simple show to a phenomenon.
Amazing. A booby trap that actually catches boobies.